In my day job, I'm a lawyer, a criminal defense attorney, and I sponsored tonight a film called Murder on a Sunday Morning, which is an HBO film, a documentary about a case in Jacksonville where a 15-year-old boy was wrongfully accused of first-degree murder. And two really dedicated public defenders who are good friends of mine, Ann Finnell and Pat McGuinness, fought and won an acquittal for him and then actually found the true murderers in the case. So when we were talking about putting a film together, a film festival together, I said, I know these people. Let's bring them up and kick off the festival, and I'll sponsor the film. So I'm happy to have done that. And so tonight, there's no charge to come and see this film, and we're thrilled about that.
The movie is Murder on a Sunday Morning. It involves a 15-year-old boy at that time, Brenton Butler, who was arrested for the murder of a tourist in Jacksonville. I got the case the day after his arrest, and I found it very troubling. The police had obtained both written and oral confessions from this young man, but in our interviews with him, he told us that they'd beaten him for it. And we tried to document that as well as we could. We had him photographed immediately and examined by others. The husband of the victim had been present when she was shot in front of his eyes, and he had identified Brenton Butler that same morning, although his initial description was considerably different than Brenton Butler. He was a thin young black man, but he was 4 inches shorter and approximately 12 years younger than had been described. As we worked the case, we found that the detectives involved had done essentially no investigation of the case. They had fixed on him as a suspect. They had questioned him over a period of hours from about 9 in the morning till 10 at night when they called his parents, who had been looking for him and actually filed a missing persons report. We called his parents and said, "We have your son and he's confessed to first-degree murder." None of what they had was true. They had no supporting physical evidence. And we selected a jury, and I think we demonstrated to their satisfaction over a period of 2 weeks that he was innocent. They were back in 45 minutes. About 3 months after that, another assistant public defender came to Ann and I with information a client of hers had and indicated he knew who the killers were. And we always take claims like that with a grain of salt, but we investigated it, and it made a great deal of sense. There were a lot of parallels. And the person he named had, in fact, committed 2 other robberies of tourists very similar to this. We brought that information to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and asked for reinvestigation. They put 2 very good detectives on it this time. And among the things they did was they reanalyzed the contents of the victim's purse and found the fingerprint of the man we had named as the killer. They gathered other corroborating evidence and ultimately obtained convictions on that individual.
The way this film came about was a French documentary film crew came to Jacksonville in 2001. And they initially went to a big civil firm in Jacksonville, and they wanted to tape a civil lawsuit. And they realized very quickly that it would be very boring and would take extremely long period of time, so the civil law firm sent them over to the public defender's office. Pat and I were just getting ready. We were about 6 weeks out from trying Brenton Butler's case. And so they came to us and said, "Would you like to be on film?" And we talked about it, and I really didn't want to be on film, and Pat did, and we talked about it some more, and Pat won out. But the bottom line was we were told that this was going to go no further than, say, like France's version of PBS. Well, as you know, probably, it was subsequently bought by HBO, which marketed it, and it won the 2002 Oscar for Best Documentary. So as a result of that, we've gotten a lot of travel and fanfare and everything else, much more so than we ever thought we would. I think it's important that this film was made because it demonstrates 2 very important things that we see every day that most people don't believe, and that is the fallacy of eyewitness identification. We had a situation where Mr. Stevens, the victim's husband, came to court and positively identified this young man as the man who had shot his wife. Unfortunately, Brenton was shown to him under very, very suggestive circumstances. That is, Brenton was picked up some blocks walking to a Blockbuster to apply for a job on a Sunday, and was brought back to the hotel where the shooting had occurred. Very shortly after the shooting, while Mr. Stevens was still in shock, he was taken out of a police car, and Mr. Stevens immediately said, that's the man who shot my wife. Very suggestive circumstances. Who else were they going to, who else was Mr. Stevens going to think they had other than the right guy? I mean, so eyewitness identification, we know from our practice, is extremely unreliable, and so this points out to the public that this is a very unreliable thing. The second thing that I think this reason that this is important is to show the fallacy of confessions. Jurors really need to look to see how and why a person states that they did a crime. Most jurors will tell you that they don't believe that they would confess to a crime they didn't commit under any circumstances, and yet we know from social science and some of the studies that are being done today that most people, in fact, will confess to things that they don't do under the right circumstances. And this was a perfect storm for those circumstances in terms of Brenton Butler and these detectives. They put a young man, a juvenile especially, in a room by himself, cut him off from everyone, cut him off from his parents, cut him off from everyone, and grilled him over a period of 9 hours. And under those circumstances, most people, but especially juveniles, will in fact confess just to get it over with, just to escape the reality. So for those two things, I think in bringing those issues to the public, this documentary is very important.
Having it shown locally is important to me. It was at one point going to be part of the Jacksonville Film Festival, but there were political considerations because it reflected badly on some parts of the government at that time. As a result of this film, they now tape all homicide interviews, which I think is a remarkably good thing. But it shows what our office does. We work for a man named Bill White who gives us the time and the resources to do what our function is, which is quality control in the justice system.